Hey everybody, this is JDGaming back today with a brand new deck profile for the channel. So PK, Phantom Knights, whatever you want to call them, are a fan favorite theme, and I've always been at least superficially interested in the concept of having free summon monsters and then they recur themselves. It's obviously a very good thing to work with in this game, but I never really dove into them. Even when Legendary Hero decks came out, I picked up a couple of the boxes, got my rusty Bardiches and all the staples, and then I didn't really know what I wanted to do with them, partially because too many OP kind of interesting, shall we say, strategies using them and overusing them kind of came around, and I was like, oh, I don't really want to do that, but I don't know what I want to do yet because I've never played around with the theme. Fast forward a little bit, and I found Darkest Diabolos sitting in my tin of old stuff, and I was like, man, this guy is such a boss monster. Pretty much invincible, comes back for free turn after turn. I wanted to build around him once again, and I wanted to do something different from the Toon Lair Turbo I built because I really like that theme, but it's so linear, and wouldn't you know it, we ended up getting two really powerful Link monsters in dual power. We got 𝕿𝖆𝖇𝑑𝖑𝖊 from the Underworld, who has the ability to trigger your stuff and protect Lair of Darkness, which is perfect because it works very well with this theme, and I needed some way to bring out this monster with two darks, and Phantom Knights kind of fit with that. And wouldn't you also know, we're getting �11, Ebon Angel of the Burning Abyss in Dark Neostorm, and that is going to work nicely in this theme as well. So I thought, hey, let's just throw all these cards together, kind of smoosh them together and make this combo-like deck that's able to go for the Phantom Knights cards for control, as well as Darkest Diabolos, and so far at least, it seems to be working much better than what I was anticipating. So I'm very happy with how this is going. Granted, again, this is my first look at the PK Phantom Knights theme here, but I think you guys may enjoy this theme. If it's your first time looking at it, I'll go through and explain my choices because this is going to be a let's build as always. And if you have suggestions because you've played this theme before, you know, let us know down below. Let's share some information, get this deck going, because I want to make this better and better as time goes on. But again, all of the information for the different sections of the video are in the description box with timestamps, so if you just want to see the alphabetical profile that is at the end of the video, you could go ahead and click the link in the description to go check that out. But without further ado, let's build PK Lair. As always, the first step in building a deck is to establish the theme and to build a core that supports our theme's goals. And here, since we're talking about PK Lair, we have dual cores, so we'll talk about the main reason to play the Lair of Darkness side with the boss monster, Darkest Diabolos, or Diabolos, the Lord of the Lair, whatever you want to call him. I'll probably call him Diabolos because that's kind of what I've gotten accustomed to. But essentially, he's a level 8 dark dragon, not fiend like Konami sometimes seems to think, with 3,000 attack and 2,000 defense. Two awesome abilities on top of a very powerful continuous ability that protects it from being tributed by your opponent's cards, meaning no kaijus or anything of that sort, and it cannot be targeted by any effects, which means it's pretty darn hard to get rid of. You can get it with mass removal, but other than that, you have to think of some very unconventional ways to get rid of this guy, which is awesome, especially in tandem with its other two abilities. If a dark monster you have on the field is tributed, except during the damage step, you can bring this guy to the field from the graveyard if it was originally there when your tribute happened, or from your hand, even if it entered your hand at the resolution of whatever tribute happened. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. That kind of text is a bit confusing, but it makes a lot more sense in context that we're going to kind of describe as we go to the next card here. But essentially what this means is you can bring this guy back from your hand or graveyard every single turn. And if it's from your graveyard, you're gaining a card every time this card comes out, which is stupid when you're bringing out a 3,000 boss monster that's very hard to get rid of in the first place. Its other ability lets you tribute any dark monster, whether it's itself or something else, in order to force your opponent to place a card from their hand on either the top or bottom of their deck. So they're either just straight up losing a card that they won't see unless they search it again or shuffle their deck or whatever by placing it on the bottom, or they have to clog up their draw if it's so full of good cards in their hand that they have to put it back on top. Either way, they're losing a card, and they're very good ways in this deck to make it so your opponent is not getting the better end of that one-for-one exchange, even if Diabolos is the one you're tributing. So this is the main boss monster we're centralizing around, and so we got to think, okay, how do we get this guy out? Well, the first thing that we have to bring him out is our 𝕮𝒑, the Wicked Warden. So this thing is a 1,700 attack, 0 defense, level 4 Dark Fiend monster that basically lets you discard it, a la all those attribute elemental kind of like field spell searchers from back in the day and like GX era. They had a bunch of cards like this where you pitch it and then you add a field spell that matches them. So you can add Lair of Darkness, which we'll talk about next, from your deck to your hand. You can also, when this guy's on your field, tribute a dark monster in order to draw a card, and if it happened to be a different dark monster, not 𝕼𝖨𝒻, could even be another copy of 𝕼𝖨𝒻, you could go ahead and add a dark monster with 2,000 or more defense from your deck to your hand, and then since Diabolos' effect is written in such a way that it says, or from your hand, even if it wasn't originally there, that 𝕼𝖨𝒻 search for Diabolos will instantly place him on the field, and that's why he's written like that. So our goal with 𝕼𝖨𝒻, other than being 3 extra copies of Terraforming and getting our field spell to our hand, is going to be to place him on the field, usually through normal summon, unfortunately, and then have something else to tribute that will allow us to get the Diabolos to our hand and then immediately to our field with 𝕼𝖨𝒻's second effect. Other than that, it is a nice upstart goblin-like card, and although you're losing a monster, you're not actually losing anything when you take into account the field spell Lair of Darkness. So this card was the reason people were hyping this strategy up like crazy when it first came out last year. I found it so difficult to find this set. It was just difficult to find it in stores on the shelves because everyone was buying 3 copies of it and it was just like sold out everywhere. But essentially, it says every face-up monster on the field becomes dark on both sides of the field. So kind of like Zombie World, but looking at attributes instead. Once per turn, if you attribute a monster you control to activate a dark monster's effect, or rather activate a card effect, you contribute a dark monster your opponent controls even if you don't control it. Which is dumb because now you have these cards that say, hey, tribute a dark monster, Lair of Darkness makes all your opponent's cards dark, and you contribute them in order to gain their ability. So 𝕼𝖨𝒻 can get rid of one of your opponent's cards to get you a free Diabolos to the field, and Diabolos can make your opponent lose a monster on their field and a card from their hand while you keep a 3,000 pretty much invincible boss monster. So this card is absolutely insane for just those reasons alone, and that's kind of where we always wished that this would stop back in the day, because the next effect is once per turn during the end phase, special summon as many Torment tokens. They're basically just vanillas with 1,000 attack and defense, Fiend level 3 monsters. They're normal, so I guess you could do something cute with like Link Spider or something, but essentially you get to spawn a number of Torment tokens to the turn player's field in defense position up to the number of monsters that were tributed during that turn while it was face up. And so the problem with this deck is that you didn't really even need an extra deck. Back when Destrudo was a thing, you'd be able to go for like Ancient Fairy Dragon and do some cheesy plays with Lair of Darkness directly that way. Maybe even throw in some like Dark Strike Fighter to bring out Diabolos. But overall, you didn't have a reason for your extra deck, and Torment tokens weren't really helpful to you, other than making it so your opponent has a monster that you can always tribute for your effects. You just gave your opponent free Link fodder, and that wasn't a good thing. But now, don't forget, we have 𝕿𝖆𝖇𝑑, and we'll talk about that as we segue into the second half of the strategy. And Lair of Darkness's tokens there, the Torment tokens, actually end up being a little bit more useful. It's not like, oh my gosh, now we have a use for Torment tokens, it's like gonna make the card better, but it does help a little bit. From there, we're going with double terraforming right now because it is semi-limited. You want a maximum number of this because, let me tell you, 𝕼𝖨𝒻 is awesome when it's able to double as a terraforming, but you do want to get its search effect off if possible. So terraforming does really help speed up the strategy, especially because I like playing 1 copy of Dragon Ravine with it, and essentially now you have 3 𝕼𝖨𝒻s, 3 Lair of Darkness, and 2 terraformings in order to get a total of 8 of your Lair of Darkness field spell. But you also essentially have 3 copies of Dragon Ravine thanks to terraforming. In Dragon Ravine, you're not using the 𝕮𝖏𝑇𝑘 effect. All you care about is you could pitch any card from your hand, dead Diaboloses or any of the PKs that we'll talk about in the latter half of this video, and you're able to send Diabolos directly from your deck to the graveyard, which means it's live for you to bring back. So 1 copy of this with 2 terraformings really adds a ton of extra accessibility to your Diabolos, and it makes it so that even if you're holding terraforming, you're not holding dead Lair of Darkness. It's always the dichotomy in this deck where you want Lair of Darkness, but extra layers are dead, and this kind of helps mitigate it because it turns 2 of your searchers into ways to get Diabolos, which is the other part of your win condition. So that's why the 1 Ravine and the 2 terraformings there. And then I love this mini engine. Borrowing this from that other thing from the Toon Lair Turbo, we've upped it now to 3 copies of Melody of Awakening Dragon, which lets you pitch any card from your hand to the graveyard in order to take 2 dragon monsters from your deck with Blue Eyes stats, essentially. Since Diabolos has at least 3,000 attack and less than 2,500 defense, you can add 2 copies of him from your deck to your hand, essentially making him free fodder for things like Lair of Darkness and trade-ins. So, you know, easy way to just keep drawing cards, get rid of extra copies. You basically just make sure you get to your Diabolos. And this kind of serves as a little bit of glue for the rest of our strategy, because since we're playing PKs who are awesome in the graveyard for getting combos kick-started, you want them in the graveyard. And this thing is one of your easiest ways to just proactively send it to the graveyard, get your Diabolos plays boiling, and you have your PKs ready to start that part of the deck to get you to your beat cop as well. So really want the 3rd copy. That's why I had to find the common Korean proxy for this, you know, because you just want the 3 copies in this strategy for the discard, if nothing else. And then kind of the new card as we talk into the next section now is Beat Cop from the Underworld. Needs any 2 monsters to summon for its diagonal arrows with 1,000 attack. But if you use 2 dark monsters with different names, which Lair of Darkness makes very easy, you get an additional ability that lets you tribute any monster. It could be itself, could be one of your opponent's monsters if you control Lair, whatever, and then target a face-up card on the field, like Lair of Darkness, right? And you place a patrol counter on it, and if that card would die, you remove the control, or the patrol counter, rather, instead. So it essentially makes it so your Lair of Darkness gets your extra abilities off of this. You sack your opponent's monster to protect your own card, and then that card will keep generating you advantage. Plus, it's a Link 2 monster, which means we will be upgrading this dark monster into the Rusty Bardiche in the next part of the deck as well. So hopefully, if you've played with Phantom Knights, you're kind of seeing, oh, you know, this is where like the 2 halves kind of start coming together. But for those of you who haven't, we'll talk about that next right now. So essentially, to boil it down, the Toon Lair Turbo deck was an extremely linear way to just throw cards out of your deck with things like Toon Table of Contents, and then have a nice little tribute monster in the form of your Toon Cannon Soldier. But we kind of eliminated both of those aspects. Toon Cannon Soldier doesn't have to be hard drawn or searched when you have Beat Cop as an easy Link 2 that can tribute itself at any time in the worst case scenario. And on top of that, you don't have to just get dead cards in your decks that are essentially upstart goblins if you're actually able to go and get plays rolling. And that's where we kind of want to look at the Phantom Knights, the PK cards. So I have a nice little mnemonic that I've been using to kind of teach myself how these cards work. So essentially, Ancient Cloak is the first one here. It's got 800 attack, which kind of sounds like Ancient Cloak. Level 3, 1,000 defense, warrior monster. Don't forget, they're not fiends, they're warriors, which is both a blessing and a curse in some ways, but we'll take advantage of that warrior typing here. If this card is in attack position, you could target any dark monster you control. Well, actually, I guess it's your opponent's card too, but I don't know why you would do that. Change this guy to defense position. If you do, that monster you chose gains 800 attack and defense until the end of your opponent's turn. Its other ability is the real reason you play this, because let's be honest, you don't really need an 800 boost other than potentially as an extra bonus. The Graveyard ability lets you go and banish Ancient Cloak from your graveyard to search any Phantom Knights card from your deck to your hand, and you can only use each effect of Ancient Cloak once per turn. So the easy way I think of it is Ancient Cloak has the 800 boost ability and searches you any Phantom Knights card from your deck to your hand, which makes it extremely valuable for continuing your plays. Unfortunately, he does not summon himself out to the field, but that's where we have to look into the Phantom Knights of Silent Boots. Fun fact, by the way, the Phantom Knights cards that have the in front of them basically are the monsters that summon themselves, and anything else that says like Phantom Knights Possessive whatever is kind of like a support card that doesn't summon itself. But essentially, Silent Boots, we're going to use that S very nicely here, lets you special summon itself anytime you control a Phantom Knights monster, and then its graveyard effect lets you add a spell or trap card from your deck to your hand by banishing it. Both effects are again once per turn, but essentially this is the linchpin of the strategy. It lets you take your Ancient Cloak or your Ragged Gloves that are going to come up, throw this guy onto the field on top of either one of those and then make a Link or an �11𝖊𝖓𝖐 play. In this deck, a lot of times you're going for that �11𝖊𝖑𝖊𝖓 because it also lets you go for your Phantom Knights Link 3 monster. But essentially, you know, easy way to remember them: Ancient Cloak is anything, and Silent Boots searches spells and traps after special summoning itself to the board. And then the last card here is going to be 3 copies here of the Phantom Knights of 𝗮𝖓𝖙𝖊𝖓𝖓𝖙𝖘, which lets you basically load anything into the graveyard. These gloves do. If you banish it from your graveyard, it's technically any Phantom Knights card it banishes, but still very powerful considering it lets you get either Silent Boots so that you can specifically nab a spell or trap and spare your Ancient Cloak search for later, or you could actually just get Ancient Cloak and then get any card like Silent Boots directly to your hand to special summon as well. Its other ability is if you use it as a Link material, or excuse me, �11𝖊𝖓𝖐𝖑 material for a dark monster, you do gain an additional 1000 attack on that card, which isn't bad. Again, it's a nice boost, but the real reason you play these cards is because you use them once and then they give you an extra card, so you haven't lost anything when making a normally 2-card minus play from your extra deck. So that's what the 𝗮𝖓𝖊𝖓𝖓𝖓𝖓𝖓 gloves do. It's kind of like a nice way to have additional names, so you could special summon your Silent Boots, and then you could also go ahead and you know, just search your other copies to get your engine a little more fleshed out. Then from there, I like playing 2 copies of the Phantom Knights of Rusty Bardiche. This thing's arrows are actually very interesting. It's got 3 arrows kind of diagonally for you, and then 1 to the side, which is relevant for its effect. And it needs 2 or more dark monsters to summon. It itself cannot be used as Link material, which is fine because the main reasons you play it are its other 2 effects. During your main phase, you can send the Phantom Knights monster from your deck to the graveyard, which will then have its other effect for later, and immediately set a Phantom Knights spell or trap card directly from your deck to your spell and trap zone. So that's awesome because now by summoning this thing, you put something in your graveyard that's going to give you a free effect, and you put something on your field that's already a free effect. So you just gained 2 cards for going into this thing, which is dumb. And on top of that, if you happen to �11𝖊𝖓𝖐𝖑 summon a dark monster to a zone this card points to, then this card can go and pop a card your opponent controls, giving you essentially 3 cards out of 1. And although you don't always go for the �11𝖊𝖓𝖓𝖓𝖓 summon on top of things, it is a nice bonus effect, especially if you're able to bring this card back from the graveyard, which is what the Phantom Knights trap cards are extremely good at doing. So we'll take a look at that, and that's kind of why he has the sideways arrow, is that when he dies, you're able to bring him right back. So the 3 copies that everyone knows and loves is 3 Phantom Knights Fog Blade. This thing is essentially, the easiest way for me to put it is it's Fiendish Chain, and that it makes a monster on the field lose its effects. It also makes it so it can't be attacked, which is interesting because it does not say that it prevents your opponent from attacking through that monster or prevents you from attacking through that monster, which essentially means that monster has to still potentially block attacks. It just can't be targeted for attacks. So it's an interesting defensive application there. Let me know if that's wrong, but I believe that is how the card works, and being able to protect yourself from attacks using 1 monster. Flexible effect negation is obviously nice, but you could banish this card from the graveyard to target a Phantom Knights monster in your graveyard and revive it, but then banish that monster when it leaves the field, which is awesome because now you can bring back your Rusty Bardiche. I keep saying Shade Brigandine, so excuse me, but Rusty Bardiche, and now he's pointing this way. You can �11𝖊𝖓𝖓𝖓𝖓 summon here, and then boom, pop another card because of that. So overall, very flexible card. The fact that you're gaining effect negation on top of Diabolos already being a pain in the butt to get rid of means that your Phantom Knights spell and traps give you such a huge reach because you don't have to stop every one of your opponent's monsters. You just have to stop the one thing that's threatening Diabolos if they can even manage to bring something like that out. For that same reason, I like playing the Phantom Knights Wing. I'm really considering bringing this thing up to 2, but for space reasons, I'm playing 1 at the moment as I'm testing the strategy out. But essentially, it lets you target a monster on your field, and it doesn't matter what it is. It could be Diabolos, it could be anything. It doesn't even have to be dark. It gains 500 attack permanently. Also, the first time it would die this turn by battle or card effect, it's not destroyed, which means now you can make your Diabolos a 3500 truly one-time invincible monster. And that's just stupid because with the 500 boost here, you can actually activate this thing during damage step. You can use it in response to something like a Black Rose, 𝗮𝖊𝖓𝖓𝖓𝖓𝖓, whatever. It's just a really powerful card that you're able to further protect Diabolos as if it even needed it. And it also has the ability where you can banish it from the graveyard once per turn in order to revive a Phantom Knights monster, which again means you could get things like your Rusty Bardiche back to the field in order to get its effects off as well. So very powerful card. Again, seriously considering playing 2, but right now just for space playing 1. And then similar case here, 1 copy of 𝕮𝖓𝖊𝖓𝖙𝖊𝖓𝖙𝖘. This thing is essentially if you have no traps in your graveyard, which honestly, it's so easy to search this and all your other traps can banish themselves. I've never had an issue with it. You just set this card and immediately if you have no traps in your grave, summon it in defense position as a normal monster. It's a dark monster. It's a warrior monster. You have all the nice Phantom Knights things, so it's a Phantom Knights monster. You could drop Silent Boots. This thing gives you so much combo potential. The only reason I'm playing 1 right now other than space is it is a hard once per turn, and so I figured, well, if I'm getting it off right now and then it's dead until another turn anyway, the first copy is definitely a priority. The second copy is more of a luxury, and that's the way I saw it. I may actually end up adding another copy of this as well. It is a very nice thing having extra access to these cards just to make your engine a little more robust and resilient in the long run. But essentially I figured, well, I mean, Diabolos is so good at clearing games that if I protect the Diabolos or get into him in the first place, then that should be sufficient. So that's why we have that. From there, we're looking at just 2 copies of the Phantom Knights of Breaksword. Essentially, this card is Scrap Dragon, if you remember him. Needs 2 level 3 monsters to summon. You can pop any card in your side of the field and your opponent's field, and then he has a bonus effect where if he dies, you get to revive 2 of your Phantom Knights monsters, essentially 2 of your materials that were used for this thing. Bring them back, but then they become level 4 monsters, or +1 level, so level 4, and then you can't summon non-dark monsters for the rest of your turn, and that doesn't matter in this deck. Everything's dark anyway, essentially, that you care about, and you can even pop this guy. So you basically go, you have 𝕮𝖓𝖊𝖓𝖊𝖓𝖓, right, or Rusty Bardiche. Once again, Rusty Bardiche, pointing to this guy. You summon this. Rusty pops a card. This thing can pop itself in another card, and then you bring back the 2 monsters, and then you can link or 𝕮𝑔𝓴 or whatever you need to with those cards. So this thing is absolutely nuts. This thing, with the extra deck not really being full or, you know, tight for space or anything in this particular build, I figured let's go and play the 2 break swords. These are very powerful removal options that are very easily accessible and on theme, so we play that. And then this is more of just because this is honestly the best dark monster that I could find that you could play for 𝕮𝑔𝓴 monsters. So he's in here just in case. He's essentially a 2500 smash to your opponent's face anytime he's brought out. And he can be brought off with the break sword. Although I usually find myself going for another Link monster off of those 2 guys, he's in here just in case for those reasons where you may want to have access to a free big monster. Break sword can basically soften up your opponent's field, and then you go for a Rebellion 𝕮𝑔𝓴 Dragon and just punch your opponent and then they die. That's kind of the idea there. And then, now we talk. Now that we've talked about the 2 halves, rather, we're talking about the tech that fleshes out the main deck, and then we'll go to the extra deck as well. So starting off, this is basically 4 cards that do essentially the same thing with slightly different flavors. Armageddon Knight sends something to the graveyard at any time he's summoned, so Phantom Knights or Diabolos, he's useful for that. 𝕿𝖃𝖊𝖓𝖓𝖓 is the same thing, but he takes a discard cost, which can be good or bad. I mean, loading Phantom Knights is good, loading Diabolos is good, but he also has the benefit of being special summoned if you already hold Diabolos, and since you have 3 of those things and 3 of the melodies, it's very easy to get Diabolos to your hand. So 𝕿𝖃𝖊𝖓𝖓 in some ways ends up becoming better, but essentially they're going to get your plays kickstarted very nicely. Rhoda lets you do that very consistently because now you can fetch these guys as needed. And then the last card here is 𝕿𝖃𝑎𝑐𝑒 Burial. Not having a body kind of does suck sometimes, but realistically just being able to send whatever you need to get your combos rolling is so powerful. There's no reason not to play 𝕿𝖃𝑎𝑐𝑒 Burial in this strategy. Pretty simple in that. And then I kind of mentioned this before when I was talking about the Melody of Awakening Dragon, but 3 copies of Lair of Darkness. Originally, I was not a fan of this in this strategy. I went so much back and forth on this card because I was like, I want to keep all my Diaboloses if I'm drawing 1 copy off of a Remo or whatever, and I want to keep my Phantom Knights because they're such a good resource engine. But the reality is, when you've built a deck kind of like this where your melodies can add 2 Diaboloses and you have 3 of every Phantom Knights, you actually can spare 1 banish card in order to get 2 fresh draws and then get all your combos rolling. You have a very specific line of play you're trying to reach. You're trying to go beat Cop to summon out Diabolos with a protected lair, and then if you have extra resources, advance that into a Rusty Bardiche play for extra defenses. So I mean, this card helps you as long as you know what your goal is. Don't blindly play this thing and it'll serve you well. Play it blindly and then, you know, I mean, I'm laughing at you because, you know, you shouldn't be playing it that way. And then the last two cards in the main deck are 2 copies of JDGaming. Econ is a staple in this type of Lair of Darkness deck because you could tribute your opponent's dark monsters anytime you have Lair of Darkness out. And although it does not summon Diabolos because it's not a dark monster you control, it's just so flexible. Being able to steal your opponent's monster for the turn, block them from killing you because you stole their best monster, or better yet, using that guy as a link material. This card enables so many plays. It's so flexible offensively and defensively, and it gets even better when we have Lair of Darkness out. So that's why we're playing 2 copies of that. 3 copies clogged a little bit in this kind of turbo style build, so that's why we're playing the 2. And of course, Phantom Knights are good targets for tributes because they're going to recur in the graveyard. Diabolos is fine. Lair of Darkness makes everything live. So overall, you're not going to have any troubles getting that card off. Then I want to talk about the extra deck here. So 𝗵𝗍𝖊𝖓𝖙, I've actually not tested all that much, to be completely honest, but essentially this card needs any 2 level 3 monsters to summon, which, hey, wouldn't you know it, all your PKs are indeed dark monsters. On top of that, it makes it so while you control this thing and you the monsters you're pointing to can't die, which is really nice because you can protect really annoying monsters, right? But on top of that, the main reason you play this thing is it lets you once per turn increase the attack of a Burning Abyss monster, which, you know, 500 attack you kind of want to boost. By sending a level 3 monster from your deck to the graveyard, you can bump up a Burning Abyss monster like 𝗵𝗍𝖊𝖓𝖙 up by that monster's attack. And the whole point of that is you send any Phantom Knights monster you need into your graveyard, and then you gain an additional effect, which is really cool because it's basically lets you Foolish Burial even further for your Phantom Knights engine. And then since he's a dark monster, if you can bring out, let's say you banish Silent Boots so that you can get 𝗵𝗍𝖊𝖓𝖙 into your hand. You set that, now you use those 2 guys and you upgrade those into a Rusty Bardiche. So overall, I'm teching him in here as kind of like a combo piece potentially. I haven't used him too much yet because he's so new. I only just realized, oh hey, he's coming out in Dark Neostorm. Let's throw him in here. But realistically, I feel like he does have application. So if you decide to try this guy out, let me know and see how he goes. And then from there, we're kind of going for some more tech. So we have Nightmare Phoenix. Although it's not a dark monster, you're not playing 𝗮𝖓𝖊𝖓𝖏 like I was originally, you know, thinking of choosing in this strategy. So overall, just having the ability to pop your opponent's spells and traps on a discard effect that furthers your strategy is nice. Witch's Apprentice is basically if you don't want to go for your 𝗵𝗍𝖊𝖓𝖏 or for your 𝗵𝗏𝐻𝐽𝗓, you just go for this instead. Generic power boost, global boost rather, and then you get the extra card recursion anytime this thing dies, which is nice. So it becomes an additional option to have. You have Nightmare Unicorn as a dark Link 3 monster. I was originally playing Summon Sorceress, but I mean, like, that card got the axe. Unfortunately, it was just too good. So Nightmare Unicorn's still very good in being able to get rid of your opponent's cards or even kick your own cards back if you want to make a combo. Discarding is nice again. I can't stress that enough in the strategy because you just load Diabolos for free. Phantom Knights will get you free cards. You can actually further your strategy with the discard outlets, so flexible options like that are always a plus. And then, of course, Borreload, Borrelsword, these guys, in my testing at least, I never brought these guys out just because I tend to go for the Rusty Bardiche, which means not only can you not use him as a Link monster, but since he's already a Link 3, you wouldn't be able to turn him into one of these guys anyway because you need 3 or more monsters. But essentially, they're in here because they're dark monsters anyway. They have game-ending potential, and if you have a bunch of resources and no real plays other than these, you just go for them. They're additional win conditions, essentially, so that's why they're in here as alternative options. And then the last 2 cards for our extra deck are just going to be Dante and Levier. You don't bring these guys out too much, at least as your initial play. They're more extenders, if anything else. So if you bring out 2 PKs, but you don't really have anything brewing, you don't have Lair of Darkness, for some reason you don't have Diabolos, that happens sometimes, Dante will let you score free mills, and then you just banish everything from your graveyard, keep getting free pluses, and then continue making plays from there. He's also a solid monster even without other Burning Abyss cards. And then Levier essentially lets you take all your banished Burning Abyss, put them back onto your field, continue making link plays with them, and you know, especially with Lair of Darkness up, you're able to turn either of these guys into link material for things like 𝗵𝗏𝐻𝐽𝗓 and 𝗍𝗏𝐻 and whatever. So you don't really completely miss out by having off-theme attributes or anything, but I do feel like they give you additional resources to further your game in the instance that you haven't won with your one-turn setup. If your opponent doesn't scoop, you could basically, you know, just keep gaining advantage off of these cards and then push them into a corner where they just have to give up. So that's why they're in here. If you watched the video in its entirety, thanks! Hopefully you guys enjoyed seeing the creation of this off-the-wall type of dark deck as much as I did putting it together. We'll start off here with the main deck, 40 cards in triple Arima, the Wicked Warden, 1 Armageddon Knight, and 𝕿𝖆𝖇𝖑𝖊. Then we have triple Darkest Diabolos, Lord of the Lair, as well as full playsets of the level 3 Phantom Knights, the Ancient Cloak, Ragged Gloves, and Silent Boots. And then for spells, we go right into triple Lair of Darkness, 1 Dragon Ravine, double JDGaming, Foolish Burial, and then we have triple Lair of Darkness, 1 Rhoda, double Terraforming, triple the Melody of Awakening Dragon, and double Trade-In. And then for our traps, we have all Phantom Knights cards here. Phantom Knights Fogblade at 3, then lone copies of Wing and Shade Brigandine. And then again, 40 cards there for the main. We'll then go to our extra deck. We have, starting with our Link Monsters, 2 𝗵𝗍𝖊 from the Underworld, Cherubini, the new I almost said Magician, Ebon Angel of the Burning Abyss, Nightmare Phoenix, and Wee Witch's Apprentice for our 5 Link 2, so lots of those guys here. And then for our Link 3s, we have Nightmare Unicorn and 2 copies of the Phantom Knights of Rusty Bardiche. And then we have 2 copies of, you know, the Boral Load and Boral Sword for our Link 4s. And that's essentially it for the Link monsters. Then for our Xyz monsters, we have Dante, Traveler of the Burning Abyss, Levier, the Sea Dragon, 2 copies of the Phantom Knights of Break Sword, and then 1 Dark Rebellion Xyz Dragon, just because sometimes you summon it off of the PK cards. That's it for now, but feel free to grab one of these videos on your way out. If you really enjoyed what you saw today, remember to subscribe to JD Gaming for more Yu-Gi-Oh videos. Thanks guys, this is JD Gaming, hope you guys enjoyed as always, and I'll see you guys next time.